Good morning, I'm Tommaso Tresso and I'm here to present the paper Digital Storytelling Formats for the Communication of Intangible Cultural Heritage in Rural and Marginal Territories, the case of the Quattro Province area, where we explore the potential use of digital formats in the communication of territorial heritage and traditions. The research starts with the analysis of what may be defined as the unexpressed potential of rural areas and a concept that emerges from the global urgency of rethinking the relation between urban metropolis and their surrounding areas, planning to balance a sustainable territory by reducing the existing socioeconomic gaps. In particular, one trend of considerable interest has come up in recent years, the so-called phenomenon of city quitters. People who go to live in rural areas for different reasons, high costs of the city, environmental protection, and by the way, the spirit of the individual is by no means touristic, but rather enables the cohesion of urban enterprises with rural areas. In the meanwhile, the situation of the Italian territory on which this research focuses is particularly significant in this regard. Inner areas cover in fact 54% of the national surface area, and two-thirds of Italian municipalities are classifiable as small municipalities. Moreover, it's clear that a connection with the rest of the territory is still missing, even if these lands are considerably efficient for the national economy. Therefore, in recent years, people and organizations launched various initiatives and creative projects with the intent of promoting their neglected heritage. Once investigated the national background, the focus of the research moved on to explore the ways in which communication design can preserve and disseminate intangible cultural heritage in local territories. And in this specific context, the field of design for territories stands out, exploring the connection between design and territorial identities. The discipline contextualizes, in fact, territories in terms of a relational system with a generative role that allows for the creation of new practices. Considering this approach, the design action takes on social impact because the project is mediated and portrayed by several subjects, and connective value, meaning that the project can lead to the sharing of different aspects of territorial knowledge. On the other hand, with the regard of the relationship between memory and territory, the concept of mnemotope emerges as an essential idea, in which the object of a spatial interpretation acts as a memory device, contributing as a tool of the reinterpretation that goes beyond the mere preservation of the past. Moreover, these objects can link to the notion of traces. In other words, these are the symbols, patterns or marks that constitute the core of a territory's identitary heritage, reviving the distinctive features of a territorial culture. From this theoretical context, the research focused on investigating the possible relations between territorial heritage and new digital communication formats. Based on the fact that the design of intangible assets cannot ignore the tradition's cultural essence, the traditional communication channels, even if they represent an honest response to the loss of local memory, aren't able to elaborate deeply on many aspects of a territorial culture. Therefore, the design focus shifts on long-form contents, a digital communication format that, through the interaction between text and rich multimedia contents, completes a two-rough narration able to show a culture's hidden aspects. Thanks to the constant interaction and animations, different types of contents are more effectively conveyed, guiding them into a more pleasing reading experience. In this sense, an analysis of the state of the art highlighted a wide use of long forms to narrate topics related to big cities and their urban development. Instead, very few examples concern the narration of suburban and rural areas. Following these considerations and the aspects that emerged during the context analysis, we aimed at experimenting the use of long-form storytelling formats for the communication of rural context, through the application of such formats to the musical tradition of the so-called Quattro Province. The Quattro Province, in fact, is a territorial area located at the northern edge of the Apennine mountain in the center of Italy. Its names come from its peculiar subdivision among the borders of four administrative counties. Aside from that, its uniqueness is not in the political parting, but lies in the fact that a substantial cultural homogeneity has taken root in these places, summarized in traditional music. Indeed, the locals inherited and conserved the territorial heritage for centuries, represented by musical instruments, chants, and ballads that define a unique territorial culture. More specifically, its musical heritage finds expressions in traditional instruments such as the piffero, a traditional wooden flute very similar to an oboe, usually adorned by locals with rustic components, or, for example, the musa, or bagpipe, that is currently one of the few bagpipes still widespread in Italy. And finally, the accordion, which is the most recent instrument that traditional musicians started to play. Due to its harmonic multifunctionality, indeed, it almost replaced the use of the musa, which was later reintroduced by some enthusiasts in the late 60s. So, after investigating the territorial and cultural traits, the research focused on the design and development of a multimedia format. From a content point of view, the process of documentation highlighted a few issues, from the lack of written sources to a systemic process of neglect of local culture. For these reasons, the research used a system of investigation based on the so-called microhistory, an ethnographical and historical research paradigm focused on oral tales and anecdotes of local individuals. Therefore, the project evolution proceeded with a similar approach. Alongside the traditional documentation research, local inhabitants were contacted and involved in project, and their testimony was used as a development for the narrative structure. In particular, we interviewed two locals that represent the modern and the ancient way of the traditional singing. In the meanwhile, digital archives, especially the site Dove comincia l'Appennino, where the Apennine begins, or bibliographical sources related to the local music tradition, were used to identify visual contents and documentations. Starting from the raw materials, the design activity focused on projecting a digital storytelling structure divided into narrative sections and capable of narrating the content of the cultural tradition. The first module consists of the home page, which represents in every aspect the virtual entrance in the Quattro Provinces world, and more precisely, the user can interact with the homepage title, which will be dusted off by the cursor's motion. Following this home page, the design of the first narrative section provides an interactive overview of the territory. In fact, the modules introduce the characteristic of the geographical context through an illustrated and interactive map that follows the territorial definition. Continuing scrolling, it is possible also to navigate a photo gallery able to engage the user with a direct glimpse of the territorial views and landscapes. After, the final interview aims to give voice to the local inhabitants. Following through the next part, the structure and the design of the second part provides a detailed report of the history of Quattro Province, whose narration starts with the origin and traditional and cultural elements. Even in this case, an interactive map tool depicts the old trade routes, and an in-depth text continues to historical and chronological tracking, also accompanied by images of historical paintings. On the other side, the third part focuses on the traditional instruments description. The visual approach for this narrative section is intentionally different because the narrative modules consist of illustrated technical data sheets aimed to describe every component of each instrument. Ultimately, the final section focuses on the most authentic and famous characters who contributed to maintaining the Quattro Province tradition, the musicians, whose lives are collected within a chronological timeline capable of transporting the reader through eras of musical tradition. More precisely, the timeline consists of two modules relating to the oldest and to the most recent musicians. In this case, the scrolling dictates the vertical interactions, which almost mark the right spot through time. So, in conclusion, through this research experience, we found out that rich storytelling formats can help express the complex nature of cultural territories that are also expression of intangible heritage. In this particular case, we experimented with the territory of the Quattro Province area, but the format can be also used for other territories with similar characteristics, and the format itself can be extended to include different types of contents. In addition, thank you so much for your attention.